Anyone who lives on the coast will be familiar with the wind-blown tree. There are a number to be seen along my regular seafront walk in Portsmouth. Such trees don't have the symmetrical shape of more sheltered regions, for the branches are all bent in the same direction, that direction being determined, of course, by the prevailing wind. From this image of coastal trees, a question arises in my mind related to the Feast of Pentecost, when the first followers of Jesus were transformed by a powerful experience of the Holy Spirit, which came upon them with the sound of the rush of a violent wind. And that question is, what is the shape of a human life that is determined by the wind of the Holy Spirit, as well as the spirit of the age? I say as well as, not instead of, for all of us are inevitably shaped by our time and context. This was true for Jesus also during the years of his life, death, resurrection and ascension. But Jesus, unlike us, was both fully human and fully divine. He who offered healing to all he encountered also experienced human violence, abandonment and death. And on the Feast of the Ascension, we celebrated an extraordinary thing, the raising of our humanity in the person of Jesus into the heart of the divine life. In the words of Christopher Wordsworth's Ascension hymn, "Thou hast raised our human nature in the clouds to God's right hand." Think about the implications of this for a moment. Human nature in its entirety, hate and fear as well as love, the capacity for violence and pain as well as peace, taken into the presence of God, our Father. Humanity taken as seriously as that, both in our ability to reach out to others in compassion and also our fatal tendency towards selfishness and destruction. All of what we are taken into the divine heart of love, the only place where we might find healing and transformation. And now, following the Ascension, comes the gift of the Holy Spirit. In the opening verses of the Acts of the Apostles, this Spirit is described as the promise of the Father, and then in chapter 2, we hear of the wind and the flame of the Spirit sweeping over the Apostles, reinvigorating them with the life of Jesus. And that is what the Spirit does for us and the whole church today, enabling us to embody all that Jesus was and is, enabling us to be the kind of people who do not need sheltering from the tough reality of the world, precisely because we know that the love of God will never let us go. The kind of people who are alert both to the homelessness on our streets and the loneliness and despair behind the prosperous facade. The kind of people who hear the cry of the abused and the refugee, the isolated and the sick, and act to show that by God's grace and in the power of the Spirit, healing and transformation is still to be found. The kind of people who pray, "Thy kingdom come," and seek to live in the light of that prayer as best we can. So, what is the shape of a human life determined by the wind of the Holy Spirit as well as the spirit of the age? I've spoken of life lived open to the full reality of what it is to be human, and life lived in a spirit of compassion and listening. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians speaks of the gifts of the Spirit given to each of us in different ways. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. So if a tree blowing in the wind is a metaphor for the Spirit-shaped life, I wonder what kind of tree you would like to be. That wind-blown coastal path variety bent over by the prevailing wind. Or perhaps you would prefer to be an upstanding oak tree or a silver birch. Well, just as there are varieties of gifts, all given by the Spirit, so there are a whole variety of trees and manifold ways in which a human life may be shaped by the Spirit. The test is not so much whether we are wind-blown or upright, but rather in how much we bear fruit.